Good afternoon to all participants from Greece and the regional countries, and good morning to those who are watching us from the United States. I'm Elias Pritunias, Executive Director of the American Hellenic Chamber of Commerce, and on behalf of the Chamber, I welcome you all to our today's very timely and interesting discussion on the US election 2020. US elections are very important, not only for the United States, but for the whole world. There are a number of issues related to the economy, entrepreneurship, commerce, and trade relations that are at stake, among many others, in this year's elections. Our Chamber is aiming with this online discussion to enlightening our viewers not only about the characteristics of the American electoral system, the existing pre-election climate, and the outcome expectations in the various states in the US, but at the same time about the possible course of the economic, trade, and foreign policy of the US depending on the outcome of the elections. We warmly welcome and thank John Decker, White House correspondent for Fox Radio, and Sia Kosioni, anchorwoman for Sky TV, for their participation. We are looking forward to an interesting and insightful conversation. I will now pass the floor to Ms. Kosioni, who will moderate the discussion. Ms. Kosioni.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, the American Hellenic Chamber of Commerce, for the invitation. And thank you, John Decker, so much for offering our audience today the opportunity to have an in-depth, a thorough look at the pre-election atmosphere in the United States, but also for helping us understand what is at stake at these elections, these weird elections. So let me just introduce you to our audience. John, is not only a journalist, a very experienced journalist, he's also a lawyer. It makes a difference sometimes, in some issues. And he's a White House correspondent for Fox News Radio. He has been a member of the White House Press Corps since 1995. This is more than 15 years, John. And in 2015, he was elected by his colleagues to the board of the White House Correspondents Association. You are also on the faculty of Georgetown University and the UCLA School of Law, where you are an adjunct professor. Is that right?
That is correct. Everything is correct, yes.
So you're going to present something to us so that you make an introduction on what's going on in Washington now. And after this, I'm going to address you some questions, which I think will help us shed some more light on some issues. So the floor is yours.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much for that introduction. Thank you to the American Chamber in Greece as well for hosting this timely event. And it's a real honor and pleasure to speak with you. I'm such a big supporter and fan of Greece. I was supposed to be there this past summer, but because of the pandemic, unfortunately, those plans have been postponed to hopefully next summer in 2021. So I look forward to returning to Greece at that time. What I intend to do is to give you a little bit of a presentation and to have just a few slides to give you a sense about where this election is right now. And also, more importantly, for those watching this presentation, where I think the election will be on November the 3rd, which is 6 weeks away. So let's go on to the next slide. And here, just to remind you, are the individuals, at least some of the individuals that were competing for the Democratic nomination. At the very beginning of the process, the front runner was Bernie Sanders, the junior senator from Vermont. He won the first two contests, Iowa and New Hampshire. But then Joe Biden really hit his stride. He won in South Carolina, and then he just had tremendous momentum. He was unstoppable in terms of winning the nomination. And one individual who is not pictured here is the person that Joe Biden chose as his running mate. That's Kamala Harris, the junior senator from California. She actually dropped out before the first contest. And I think that was a good move for her politically. And obviously, the Biden campaign feels that she adds a lot to the ticket as the vice presidential nominee. And we can get into that a little bit further as we have our discussion. Let's move on to the next slide. This, of course, is the incumbent, and there are many advantages of incumbency, as you know, no matter who the president is. President Trump, in the first week that he took office back in 2017, started his re-election campaign. He left no doubt that he was planning to run for re-election and started raising money right away for that re-election run. But what has been interesting in terms of this race between President Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden is that Joe Biden has raised a considerable amount of money. In fact, in the month of August, the Biden campaign outraised the Trump campaign by $154 million. Very significant. So I must tell you, I travel with the president pretty often. I see the crowds that he has when I travel with him as I'm in the motorcade after we get off of Air Force One. And he's got a lot of energy on his side. There is no doubting that. At the same time, there's energy on the other side. And the energy is not so much real excitement for Joe Biden. The energy a second term. And that essentially is what this election is all about. It's become a referendum. Finished with 306 electoral votes. Hillary Clinton finished with 232 electoral votes. And the Electoral College is how America chooses its president. It's not popular vote like it is in most other countries in the world. Each state, as you see, has a certain amount of electoral votes depending upon how large the state is in terms of population. So, for instance, you can see on the far left of the United States, California has the most electoral votes, followed by Texas at the bottom. New York State follows that, and Florida in the southeast corner of the United States also have combined a considerable number of electoral votes. Some states are very predictable. So I could tell you right now, in fact, anybody could virtually tell you right now how states will end up on election day in 2020. California, it's going to go for Joe Biden. Texas is going to go for Donald Trump. New York State is going to go for Joe Biden. Florida is what's known as a battleground state. Polls indicate a very tight race in Florida. And I'm going to, in our last slide, show you what I think the map will look like on November the 3rd. But let's take a look at this map. As you can see, there's a lot of red in this map. Pockets of blue, but a lot of red. And that means President Trump in 2016 did exceptionally well in some of the least populous states in the middle part of the country. You see how he did in Nebraska and Wyoming, in Utah. These are traditionally red states, and they're not going to change much between 2016 and 2020. And it's also important to consider, and we'll see this in the next slide, that although President Trump won, in my opinion, overwhelmingly in the Electoral College, in the popular vote, that wasn't the case. You can see this particular slide, and you can see that Hillary Clinton beat Donald Trump by 3 million votes in 2016. 3 million more Americans voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016 than they voted for President Trump in 2016. But again, unfortunately for Hillary Clinton, that's not how we choose our president. And I think that Hillary Clinton managed to increase her totals because she really ran up large margins of her victory in states like California and New York State and Illinois. And that accounted for the fact that she won the popular vote. Here is something I will predict with certainty, and that is in 2020, Joe Biden will win the popular vote. And I think that you would be hard pressed to find an advisor to President Trump, either at the White House or at the campaign, that disagrees with what I said, that Joe Biden will win the popular vote. He's leading by 20 plus points in California alone, which accounts for a significant part of the popular vote in that particular state. So again, when you look at polling, which indicates national polling, and those polls come out very often, I generally ignore them. They're irrelevant for the most part. They give a sense about how Americans as a whole feel about Donald Trump versus Joe Biden, but they don't give us a window as to what the results will be in 2020. And let me, with that, go to the final slide that I've prepared. So this is the 2020 electoral map as I see it today on this Thursday. But I'm also very comfortable leaving this map in place all the way through Election Day. And that's a pretty remarkable thing to say. But here's what I believe. I believe at the very beginning part of this year, the very beginning part of 2020, most Americans had made up their minds as to how they're going to vote on Election Day. They're either going to vote excitedly so for Donald Trump. They're very pleased with the way he's gone about keeping some of his campaign promises. They like the way that he puts, in the president's words, America first. And there's a lot of energy for that. And again, I see that when I go out with the president and I go out on the campaign trail with the president. At the same time, there are other Americans, we are a divided country, that are so excited to defeat Donald Trump. They can't wait to go to the polls on Election Day or mail in their ballots, because there are those procedures also in place because of the pandemic, where in many parts of the country, and we can talk more about that in our discussion, but in many parts of the country, because of the pandemic and because of efforts to keep Americans safe, individuals will mail in their ballots as opposed to waiting in line and not maintaining the social distance that you need. So at the very beginning of the year, the map, in my opinion, looked like this. And that's pretty remarkable when you consider all the things that have happened in 2020 in the United States, and also, for that matter, in the rest of the world. In the United States and the rest of the world, we've had a health crisis. We are dealing with the coronavirus pandemic. We have an economic crisis. We are dealing with tens of millions of Americans who, because of the pandemic, are now unemployed. We are dealing with racial unrest. And an example of that can be seen if you've tuned into the news in the past 24 hours or read the paper today. You see an example of that because of what has happened in terms of a grand jury decision in the state of Kentucky. And most recently, in the past week, we learned that there is a vacancy on the U.S. Supreme Court because of the passing of a very prominent Supreme Court Justice, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who voted typically with the liberal bloc on the U.S. Supreme Court. So now there's a vacancy among the 9 seats that are on the U.S. Supreme Court. The president has vowed to fill that seat before the end of the year. I was with the president yesterday in the cabinet room, and he says he wants to fill that particular seat by Election Day, which is a pretty remarkable timetable if the president and Republicans in the Senate can do that. So I'm making this forecast despite the fact that so much has happened in 2020. And, you know, there is often talk of an October surprise, something more that could come out in the course of the next 6 weeks. And I'm sure there's going to be more that will come out over the course of the next 6 weeks, including the fact that on Tuesday of next week, on September the 29th, will be the first presidential debate. So that will be another factor to consider that voters will consider as they get ready to cast their ballot in 2020. And we can talk more about the debates as well and what you can expect. By the way, if you're interested in watching the debates live, they start at 9 p.m. Eastern time in the United States, which means you'd have to get up a little early. In Greece, at 3 a.m. in the morning, but it's, I think, an interesting way to start your day. There will be 3 presidential debates and next Tuesday will be the very first one. So we'll get into that as well during our conversation. But let's take a look at this electoral map as I've talked about sort of what has led me to put this forecast together. The way I see the United States right now in terms of voting on Election Day, I see President Trump, who is denoted with red once again, with 260 electoral votes. Joe Biden with 232 electoral votes. And that means that at this stage, there are 3 states, in my opinion, that I have not colored in. They're gray. They're at the top of the map. You see them from right to left: Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And these 3 states are states the president won. Surprised a lot of people in 2016 because these states, over the course of the past 5 election cycles, have been Democratic states. If you go through what's happened over the past 5 elections, Bill Clinton won Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin twice. If you go through what happened in 2000 and 2004 with George W. Bush, same thing. Democrats won those 3 states in those 2 election cycles. Barack Obama won Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. So these were traditionally blue states. But what Donald Trump did in 2016 is he surprised so many people. He surprised so many people in terms of flipping these states. And I'll tell you an anecdote. Last April, I was speaking in person. Yes, that was possible back last April in the Netherlands to AmCham Netherlands. And while I was there, I took an opportunity to have lunch with the U.S. ambassador to the Netherlands. And his name is Pete Hoekstra. He's a former U.S. congressman from Michigan. And in 2016, he essentially was in charge of the Trump campaign in Michigan. And he told me, he said he was surprised himself that Donald Trump won Michigan in 2016. He didn't win it by much. He won it by 13,000 votes out of millions of votes that were cast, but he won it. And that surprised even the person who ran the Trump campaign in the state of Michigan. In the state of Wisconsin in 2016, Hillary Clinton made a big mistake in the sense that from the time that she won the Democratic nomination until Election Day, she never visited Wisconsin. I think she took it for granted. She saw the electoral history of Wisconsin, saw how Barack Obama, the Democratic president for 2 terms, had won it pretty easily. So I think that the Hillary Clinton campaign said, why spend our time in Wisconsin? Why spend our resources in Wisconsin? We can devote our resources, our campaign cash, to other parts of the country where the race is, we believe, going to be a lot tighter. So she actually ignored Wisconsin, which was a mistake. And in Pennsylvania, what we saw in Pennsylvania in 2016, when Donald Trump won Pennsylvania, is that the turnout for Hillary Clinton in places where she needed a large turnout just didn't happen, specifically in the African American community. Black voters did not come out for Hillary Clinton in the way that the Clinton campaign expected that demographic to do. And as a result, what Donald Trump did in Pennsylvania is he really racked up his totals in the rest of the state to offset the advantages that Hillary Clinton received in the city of Philadelphia, in the southeast corner portion of the state. So that gives you a little bit of background before I talk more about this 2020 electoral map. You'll notice at the far northeast corner of the map is the state of Maine, and it's colored red and blue. You'll see it's sort of a stripe, red and blue. And the reason being is because in Maine, they award their electoral votes differently than the rest of the states in the United States. Every other state in the United States, if you beat, let's say you're Donald Trump and you beat, actually, let's go to a real life example instead of a hypothetical. In 2000, George W. Bush ultimately beat Al Gore in the state of Florida by 537 votes. That's it, just that small margin of victory. And because he beat him by even that small margin of victory, all of Florida's electoral votes went to George W. Bush, which, by the way, decided the US presidency. That was the state that decided the election in 2000, the state of Florida. Maine, unlike Florida, and Maine, unlike the rest of the states in the United States, does not award their electoral votes in that manner. If you, for instance, win a congressional district in the state of Maine, you would get one electoral vote. And that's exactly what President Trump did in 2020. He won one electoral vote in the state of Maine because he won the 2nd congressional district. And I think he's going to do it again. I traveled with the president to Maine on Air Force One to Bangor, Maine in June. And we went specifically to the district that the president won in 2016. And the turnout for the president was, in my opinion, remarkable. As we drove in the motorcade from the airport to just a few miles to where the event was going to take place, the roads were lined with Trump supporters, Trump hats, Trump shirts, Trump signs. They were so excited. It was as if, every person in that part of Maine had turned out to see the president. That's the feeling that I got. And the president was very energized by that particular visit. And I think that it's going to be close in that particular district, but I think the president's going to win it and he's going to get one electoral vote. Now you may say, wow, what's one electoral vote? This election, here's the headline. This election is going to be so incredibly close that even that one electoral vote is going to make a difference to President Donald Trump, which is not to say he's going to win, but I am saying it's going to make a difference. So as we look at this electoral map and these 3 gray states that are not colored in, today, Thursday, September the 24th, I can actually color in 2 of those states, and I'm going to do so. So let's take a look first at the state of Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania has 20 electoral votes. And what we saw, as I mentioned in 2016, is that the turnout that was expected in the Black community in Philadelphia did not happen the way that it was expected to for Hillary Clinton. That will not be the case in 2020. What Democrats have seen is some of the mistakes that were made by Hillary Clinton in 2016. And they have essentially prepared for the 2020 election in terms of mobilizing Black voters in particular to either vote by mail or to vote in person for Joe Biden on election day or by mail. And I believe that these numbers will be historic. They may even be larger than we saw for what turned out for Barack Obama in 2008 and 2012. And so because of that immense turnout, I think it's going to overwhelm Donald Trump's strength in the rest of the state. Trump is not taking this lying down. He's visiting Pennsylvania often. He's visited Pennsylvania pretty much every week for the past 4 weeks. He will continue to do so as we get closer and closer to Election Day. And Joe Biden, for his part, this is the state that he's visited the most since securing the Democratic presidential nomination. It's easy for him to visit Pennsylvania. He's from neighboring Delaware, so it's not a difficult task for him to head up to Philadelphia or out to Pittsburgh or to the middle of the state in Harrisburg. He's doing that. He will continue to do that. So with that all being said, if you add those 20 electoral votes to Joe Biden's total that you see up here, he's now at 252. 252. Now let's take a look at Michigan. This is another state that I'm prepared to color in. Michigan is a state that President Trump won essentially by the skin of his teeth in 2016. And he did that because turnout, again, was not what the Clinton campaign was hoping for in Detroit and the Detroit suburbs, specifically with African American voters. Again, Democrats have learned their mistakes from 2016. And the mistakes of 2016, they say, will not be repeated in 2020. I agree with them. I do. I agree with them. I speak often to both campaigns. I speak often to the Trump campaign, to people affiliated with the Trump campaign, as well as senior officials of the Biden campaign. And I've traveled with the president to this state in particular. The energy's there. Don't get me wrong. The energy's there with the president's supporters, but also the energy is there on the anti-Trump side as well. And so, given that, if I were to color, I am going to color, I'm not going to if, I'm going to color in that gray state, which you see right now, Michigan, turn it blue. And that means that if you add up Pennsylvania and Michigan, Joe Biden would be at 268 electoral votes to President Trump's 260. And that leaves one state, Wisconsin, deciding the 2020 presidential election. 10 electoral votes, that's it, could decide this next presidential election in just 6 weeks. And whoever wins that one state, by my forecast, wins the presidency. And this has happened before. It happened in 2000 when Florida decided the presidential election. It happened in 2004 when Ohio decided the presidential election for George W. Bush. And I believe it's going to happen in 2020 with the state of Wisconsin deciding the presidential election, either way for Donald Trump or Joe Biden. Both Joe Biden and Donald Trump are traveling to Wisconsin a lot. They are spending a lot of money in television ads in Wisconsin. In fact, record numbers. They recognize how important this state is. Recent polls, and a good site for you if you're really into following this and this is interest for you, a good site, website to go to that I go to a few times a day actually is a site called realclearpolitics.com. And when you go to that site, in the upper left-hand corner, you can click on polls, and it gives you the most recent polls coming out on that particular day. It gives you what is happening in individual states all across the country. It's updated almost on an hourly basis. And it gives you a sense about how Donald Trump and Joe Biden are doing all throughout the country. Recent polls show that Joe Biden is winning in the state of Wisconsin. That could change. I think that that particular poll may be overstating the margin that Joe Biden has over Donald Trump, despite the fact that even Fox News polling shows that Joe Biden is leading Donald Trump outside the so-called polls margin of error. So that's the reason why I'm reluctant to color in that state at that particular time. But you can see what happens when you have Joe Biden at 268, Donald Trump at 260 electoral votes. If Donald Trump wins Wisconsin, he hits 260 electoral votes. That's right on the button, right on the money in terms of what he needs to win re-election. All you need is 270 electoral votes. And if the president, according to this electoral map, wins Wisconsin, he's there. He's in there for the next 4 years. By contrast, if Joe Biden wins the state of Wisconsin, that puts him at 278 electoral votes. It's a squeaker as well, but he would get a 4-year term as president of the United States. So that's how I see the electoral map shaping up. And I feel comfortable with this map, even not knowing what's going to take place over the course of the next 6 weeks. As I have stated many times, Americans are very divided right now. It's a very divided country. People have made up their minds. They either really like Donald Trump or they really dislike Donald Trump. There's about 5% or so of the electorate, the American electorate, that's undecided. That's who all the campaign ads are directed to. That's what all of the campaign fundraising is directed to, trying to get those individuals motivated to vote either for Joe Biden or Donald Trump. And that's where I see the election of 2020 heading forward. And one last thing before I just wrap this up and leave this to a discussion and also take your questions. And that is, we may not know the actual winner of the presidential election on November 3rd or November 4th. And the reason being is because a record number of American voters are going to vote by absentee ballot. And that will take time in terms of counting those ballots. There may be lawsuits like we saw in the state of Florida in 2000. So get prepared for that. But let me remind you of one thing, and I'll end it right here. In 2000, in the year 2000, America and the rest of the world did not know who the next president was going to be until December the 13th, 5 weeks after Election Day. And that was the day that Al Gore ultimately conceded the election to George W. Bush. So America has been patient before in terms of not knowing who the president is right away. So we've dealt with that uncertainty. We can certainly do it again. I think most people would love to know on November the 3rd or 4th who the next president is, including both Joe Biden and Donald Trump. But be prepared for a week's wait, or 2 weeks, or 3 weeks, or 4 weeks before we know who the next president of the United States is. And with that, that is my presentation, and let's begin our discussion.
Thank you so much, John. This has been extremely helpful, and it sounds like we're going to experience some suspense election night. So before I address some questions that I have here for you, just let me encourage our audience to do the same, and I can transfer these questions to John immediately. But my first question is about the polls. This is a tight race, as you presented it. And my question is this: it's the end of September, and Biden seems to have a polling advantage. I mean, Hillary Clinton, however, appeared to have exactly the same the previous elections. What are the differences between 2016 and 2020?
Well, that's a really great question. And it's a question that I've asked pollsters. So I've reached out to the pollster who conducts polls for Fox and pollsters for other major polling companies that are very prominent in the United States. And I've asked them the question, you made mistakes in 2016. There's no doubting that. What have you done to correct those mistakes? And each of these pollsters for 4 different polling companies, which are prominent polling companies, say, we have taken our mistakes that we made in 2016 into account in putting together these new polls for 2020. For instance, in individual states, there was an underrepresentation of individuals who lacked a college degree. And that was a critical demographic group that went for President Trump in 2016. They say that they've made up for that difference. They also say that they can now better isolate, when they do their polling, the percentage of individuals that are not just registered to vote, but will actually go to the polls on election day or vote by mail to register and cast their ballot for either Donald Trump or Joe Biden. So that's what they say when they say their polls are much more accurate than what we saw in 2016. I take them at their word. I at the same time, they're, and I hear this from Trump supporters all the time, they feel that there is this so-called silent majority, that when pollsters talk to supporters who may cast their votes for Donald Trump, those individuals may not be that forthcoming with pollsters, and there may be an undercount in the polling in terms of Donald Trump's support. I think there's something to that. I can't dismiss that idea entirely, and that's why, for instance, with the state of Wisconsin, I can't say one way or the other at this moment in time which direction that particular state is ultimately going to go, despite the fact that polls indicate that Joe Biden leads Donald Trump in that state.
But what do you think that will shape the outcome? It has been a very tense period.
Yes.
So is it a referendum on Trump's personality, or is it about policies? Is it the economy? Is it the handling of the pandemic? What is it? What do you think?
Well, when pollsters ask the question, what are the issues that are most important to you? And the issues that are most important to voters this election cycle are the issues that typically most election cycles are also important to voters. That is, jobs in the economy, the coronavirus pandemic, racial unrest. Those are the things that typically are the top three issues for voters. And now there's another issue, and that is the future direction of the U.S. Supreme Court with the passing of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. This election cycle, foreign policy, foreign affairs, international affairs, it's not a terribly big issue for voters. It was big in 2004 when the Iraq War was going on. That was perhaps one of the biggest issues that decided that campaign. When John Kerry, who was the Democratic nominee, ran on that particular issue, trying to end the war more quickly in Iraq. It's not a big issue right now. The president, to his credit, and he would tout this, has had some foreign policy successes. We saw that Mideast peace deal signing, the normalization of relations between Israel and two Arab countries, Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates, just a few weeks ago. That's a success. But most voters are not going to cast their ballots because of the diplomatic or foreign policy issues that the president has confronted over the past 4 years. It's going to be jobs in the economy, the coronavirus pandemic, and how the administration has handled the coronavirus pandemic. For some voters, racial unrest, and also the future direction of the court. And again, to your question, and I mentioned this at the top of my presentation, this election will be a referendum on Donald Trump. It's not going to be so much Trump versus Biden. That's the way the Trump campaign would love it to be. It's more so a referendum on Donald Trump. And that's why I think it's such an incredibly close race.
Trump or non-Trump election.
Yeah, that's right.
You mentioned the passing of Judge Ginsburg. Do you think it's going to be a September surprise? Do you think the upcoming fight over the Supreme Court could upend the election?
Well, this is something that individuals, pundits, analysts, journalists, political watchers speak of every 4 years, this so-called October surprise, something which could change the direction of the election. And there may indeed be some things that come out between now and Election Day. As I mentioned, there are 3 presidential debates that will take place. One on Tuesday, September the 29th, another on October the 15th, and the third and final one on October the 22nd. There's also a vice presidential debate that will take place on October the 7th. These are big events, and there's no question about it. However, I don't think that they will change the direction of where the race stands right now. There could possibly be something. I can't see the future, but I think that generally these types of events, debates, don't change elections all that much in recent times. There have been examples. Nixon versus Kennedy in 1960, where Kennedy bested Richard Nixon. A lot of political analysts, before my time, but a lot of political analysts say that helped John F. Kennedy considerably in terms of winning the election in 1960. In 1980, Ronald Reagan against Jimmy Carter. And when Ronald Reagan asked that question to voters, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? That was a critical question that was asked during that particular debate that changed perhaps the direction of that particular election. But in recent election cycles, that really has not been the case. I believe that Mitt Romney beat Barack Obama in each of the 3 debates that they had. But of course, Mitt Romney lost the 2012 presidential election. And the same thing can be said for 2004. John Kerry, I believe, beat George W. Bush in all 3 presidential debates, but George W. Bush won the election. So I don't think that debates have the kind of effect that some people believe they do. And there's one other thing to keep in mind, and that is that the Trump campaign, and President Trump in particular, has really lowered expectations for Joe Biden in these upcoming debates. President Trump has called Joe Biden Sleepy Joe and Slow Joe, these denigrating terms. And it makes one believe that Joe Biden's not going to, be all there and go toe to toe with Donald Trump in these debates. And by lowering expectations, I think it obviously helps Joe Biden, because he is the underdog going in. And like in sporting events, if you lower expectations for the underdog, they sometimes outperform their expectations.
Something is telling me that these debates are going to achieve very high ratings.
Yeah, you are right about that.
They are very much expected, not only in the US, but around the world. You also mentioned in your presentation the possibility of not having a clear winner on November 3rd, John. So America historically takes pride in so-called the peaceful transitions. What can we expect this time? What is your personal opinion?
Well, I was at the White House press briefing yesterday, a press conference the president gave, and he was asked a very similar question to the question that you just asked me by a colleague of mine. And the president was asked, will there be a peaceful transition of power? And the president could not commit to that, which was remarkable. We live in the oldest democracy. We pride ourselves in having one of the oldest democracies in the world. And so this makes some people uncomfortable, including a Republican senator from Utah named Mitt Romney, who put out a statement yesterday criticizing the statement that President Trump made. So the president says that. Here's what I do know as a lawyer and as someone who knows the Constitution quite well. If, and it's an if, but if President Trump loses the election in November and the declared winner is Joe Biden, President Trump's term will end on January the 20th of next year. It will end. That's the bottom line. Our military takes an oath, and they don't take an oath to the President of the United States. They took an oath to the U.S. Constitution, and they're going to abide by the U.S. Constitution. And that's a big if, but if President Trump loses the election and Joe Biden is the declared winner, it's pretty clear cut, then Joe Biden will be sworn in as the new president on January the 20th of next year.
Wow. John, in his first term, President Trump challenged international institutions and norms. What can be expected in case he's re-elected? Are you worried to be more specific about the Trump and Hinge scenario?
Well,
would this mean for the allies and partners of the United States?
This is a terrific question, another terrific question you've put together. And it's a question I asked the president just a few weeks ago when I interviewed him exclusively for Fox. And the question I asked him was phrased a little bit differently. But I said, if you win a second term, Mr. President, will you mend fences with the European Union? Will you mend fences with our European allies? Because as you know, as everybody who's watching this presentation knows, the U.S. relationship with the EU is quite frankly not the same as the relationship that existed under either President Barack Obama or, for that matter, President George W. Bush. It's been at times adversarial. I mean, the trade tariffs policy is an example of that. And so let me just answer your question with two scenarios. If Donald Trump wins re-election, and he answered this question this way, he's going to adhere to the policies that he has adhered to during the course of his first years in office. And so he would not commit, in answering my question, to mending fences, to use that term. I would certainly hope, I think that there are so many advantages of having a strong partnership between the US and Europe, so many advantages of having a strong relationship between the US and Greece, that cannot be diminished. But the president feels that his policies work well. His trade tariffs policies put America in a better position economically. And so he's going to adhere to that if he wins on November the 3rd and has another 4-year term. If Joe Biden wins, by contrast, I think you're going to see a return to that internationalist approach that we saw under Barack Obama. It's going to be a foreign policy that looks remarkably like Barack Obama's foreign policy, which means closer relations with the European Union, closer relations between the US and our European allies, an end to the trade tariffs policies that have dominated much of the Trump presidency. And so if you are, sort of looking ahead to what we can expect post January the 20th, those are the two possibilities that I see going forward.
Do you have, John, a specific opinion about the engagement of the United States as far as our area is concerned, the Mediterranean and Greece? It seems like, the United States have disengaged from the area and the issues that we have here. So what would a Biden administration or a Trump administration mean for the Mediterranean area and the American-Greek relationships?
Well, traditionally, as you know, the U.S. and Greece have had very strong, warm relations. I think the president sometimes sees relations between countries as not so much between countries, but often between leaders. He develops a relationship with specific leaders. And you are correct. The focus during the president's first 4 years in terms of foreign policy has not really been much on the Mediterranean. And I don't anticipate that changing, in the same way I don't anticipate the president changing the views that he's held as it relates to Europe as a whole. For Vice President Joe Biden, former Vice President Joe Biden, if he wins re-election, I think there will be a stronger connection that exists between the U.S. and Mediterranean countries. You may see also a different type of approach towards Turkey, whereas the president has developed what seems to be a strong type of relationship with the leader of Turkey, Erdogan. I don't see that continuing if Joe Biden, for instance, wins in November and wins a 4-year term as president. Relations between the U.S. and Turkey, I think, are going to diminish from what they are right now. And that is something that you should also be looking at post January 20th.
Mm-hmm. Now, one question that has to do with interior. To outside observers, the United States appear as divided as ever, having surrendered to intense and even toxic partisanship. Do you believe that the country can heal moving forward?
Well, as a citizen, as an American, and that's what I am first before anything else, before a journalist. I'm a citizen of the United States. I'd love to see our country more united and not as divided as it is. But people forget the country's been divided for some time. It's, I think, more pronounced now, that's for sure. But people sometimes forget that in the late 1990s, we impeached an American president. That was Bill Clinton. That was an indication of how divided the country was. And it was divided during the whole period of the Iraq War, during the George W. Bush administration. It was divided during Barack Obama's 2 terms as president. Again, not as much as we see right now. And it's, of course, divided right now, but it's really pronounced right now. And I think it's pronounced right now because, in large part, the way the president governs, it's not a method of uniting Americans. And in addition to that, you also have an indication that this racial unrest is something that is problematic for so many American voters, whether no matter what demographic group they come from. And that's troubling to see. So my hope is that regardless of the results of the November election, America accepts those results, again, regardless of what they are, and we can somehow find our similarities that unite us and hopefully, bring more of America together. Well, it will never be fully divided. It's fully united, like it was. I remember the days, and I was at the White House covering 9/11. I mean, how united the country was at that moment in time. And I would love to see that same type of a united country again. But the reality is, I don't think we're there just yet. And my hope, I think everybody's hope, is that we can find the similarities among us that unite us, and we have that post November 3rd, which is, of course, Election Day.
Mm-hmm. And here comes my final question, John. It seemed that during the last elections, fake news through especially social media played a really important role as far as the outcome is concerned. What do you think about this race? Do you have any indication that we will get to deal with such an issue again?
Well, another excellent question. And so U.S. intelligence agencies, they made mistakes in 2016. They did not see how the Russian government and Russian entities were trying to influence our U.S. election. And U.S. intelligence agencies, whether you're talking about the NSA or the FBI or the CIA, they've all come to the conclusion that Russia tried to interfere and did interfere in our 2016 election, not in terms of changing vote totals, but in terms of trying to change perceptions of how American voters feel about, in the case of 2016, Hillary Clinton. And so we heard just last week from the FBI director, who confirmed that the Russian government is trying to do it once again. The Chinese government also trying to influence our election, again through social media. The difference, though, between 2016 and 2020, I think, is that we know what happened in 2016, number one. So we're sort of on guard for that. And number two, as it relates to 2020, we formed our impressions already. Americans have formed our impressions already of both Donald Trump and Joe Biden. And it's hard, even with social media posts and Twitter and Facebook, to change the way we think of these two presidential candidates. And one final thing, and that's a private sector thing. Facebook and Twitter have pledged not to allow any political advertising in the final week of the presidential campaign, which is something they did not have in place in 2016. So my hope is that it doesn't have the social media, what you're talking about and discussing, does not have that negative impact that it had in 2016. And I really honestly don't think that it will.
Yeah, it seems like a symbolic action to be taken because, most of the people shape the opinion much earlier, but
That's
still
right.
it's something symbolic. So thank you so much. This has been really, really interesting and very helpful.
Sure.
thank you, John Decker. I hope I meet you in Washington in November.
Yeah.
And if Mr. Spiritunas, please come with us and end up this event. We hope we attracted your attention.
Definitely you did. Definitely you did. I want to thank John Decker for this analytic presentation of the characteristics of the U.S. elections. We find it very enlightening, I guess, all of us. And thank you, Sia Koscioni, for moderating an excellent conversation. I'm pretty sure that all viewers enjoyed as much as we did. And we're really, John, by the way, we're really looking forward to see you in Washington in a few months if coronavirus, of course, permits it.
Let's hope so.
I want to thank you again, both of them, for your contribution, for your participation. And dear members of friends of the American Chamber of Commerce in Greece, we thank you for being tuned with our event. We wish you all a very great day. Thank you.